Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Dr. Ilamanga, and we are here today for the second episode of Threads of Healing, Voice of Breathwork-Africa series. And I'm so honored to be holding the space today in conversation with powerful voices from Breathwork-Africa. And today we're going to be talking to a very special human being, someone who I'm really honored to know, someone who is a really valued member of the Breathwork-Africa community. And Philani, very warm welcome to you. It's so wonderful to have you with us. So I'd like to introduce you to Philani. Philani is an IsiNTU cosmologist, a unity consciousness researcher and breathworker. His work is devoted to remembering and restoring African spiritual wisdom to the world. He brings a reverent and insightful lens to breathwork, rooted in ancient cosmology, contemporary consciousness, and deep personal experience. This series, Threads of Healing, Voices of Breathwork-Africa, is a celebration of our diversity, our stories, our practices, and our collective commitment to healing through the breath. And today, our topic is breath through the lens of African indigenous wisdom. And we're going to talk to Philani about how his life journey has shaped his sacred relationship with uMoya, the spirit of breath. So, Philani, welcome. It's really a great honor to share this space with you today.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you so much, and good evening to everyone.
Oh, Philani, I have so many questions.
I
You
know.
have,
Yeah.
when I first met you, I was struck by your embodied sense of grace and wisdom. And as much as you hold so much incredible, deep ancestral wisdom and wisdom from your own life experience, you're very much in the world. You're very much in the world of business and life. And I thought perhaps you could give everybody a snapshot view of your life and where you find yourself in your everyday reality.
Okay, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I find myself, particularly in the last 10 years of my life, trying to navigate, as you say, the world and what many people may call a spiritual calling, which I prefer to call just a remembering of the reason you chose to incarnate, right? So professionally, I co-own an impact fund manager. So I'm building a private equity business. Historically, I grew up in management consulting. So I co-own a management consultancy with one of my former bosses at one of the big firms I used to work for. So with that in mind, I'm finally finding myself being able to shape my professional life in a way that speaks to my calling, as it were, which is quite interesting because most people know that in Zulu the name, the Zulu word for name is igama, but it's actually the older word is ibizo. Ibizo is essentially a calling. So you would be named according to what your parents understood to be your calling. So I'm finally finding myself where the two worlds are converging. But just as a bit of background, I was raised in my maternal family by an unmarried mother. So what that means is you become the child of your grandparents. Particularly in my case, my grandfather played a very key role. He was a pastor in a Zionist church. What that means is not Zionism in the current meaning. It's the churches that try to combine indigenous cosmology to the Christian cosmology, as it were. So spirit-led healing. So even my grandfather, for instance, was illiterate. So he couldn't read the Bible, but he was leading a church that would use faith healing, water, breath, rhythm, through drumming, etc., and singing to heal. So I grew up around that background, and I just couldn't fully understand why we needed the church, because I didn't fully understand why we would talk about ancestors at home, and then we talk about what seemed to me even as a 4 or 5 year old, about a foreign god, the church, that didn't cosmologically, I didn't feel that these two there was coherency in the understanding. So this has always been my life in a sense, and it would indulge me, it would have these conversations with me. Later on in life, a friend who's here with us today, who's attending, who's now a healer himself, recognized about 10 years ago that you look so misaligned. You don't seem like yourself. We've always known you, to your point, Ella, as someone who comes with wisdom, even when we were at university, but you seem misaligned. And at that point I was in corporate. I was a chief operating officer of a successful business. I was studying at INSEAD, doing my executive MBA, doing all the things that, according to the corporate life, you're supposed to achieve. But I remember at graduation, my wife told me straight, you need to deal with your depression because you're not okay. So, and that's because the work that I was doing professionally was not in alignment, again, with what I call ubizo lwami, or my calling, or the reason I called my existence, or my incarnation to happen at this time. So I went through quite a rough journey to try and find what I couldn't connect with. There has to be some understanding of God that pre-exists the arrival of the European in South Africa. There's no way that, we only knew of ancestors, right? So I just really struggled with that. And I started on a path of searching until and I started meditating, and through meditation, my dreams got better, because our cosmology is that our ancestors generally communicate to us, amatongo, through dreams and other signs. So the dreams started occurring, but the messages were still incoherent, until a time where a friend who's into breathwork invited me to a 5-day online breathwork session during COVID. And I had what some may describe as, I reached what most people would describe as an altered state of consciousness. And for lack of a better term, I went to the other side and communed. For those 5 days, the conversation continued. And it became clear to me around my struggle as a kid was unity versus separation consciousness. And what I mean by that is, in our understanding, when I say I'm an IsiNTU cosmologist, I'm running away from using the term African spirituality, because there's no such a thing to me. Spirituality is universal. But IsiNTU speaks to at least our understanding of, from a cosmological perspective, the primordial source field that pre-exists everything. We call that Ntu, as Abantu, and hence the term Abantu, those of Ntu. And when I did dug deeper, I understood that the Vedic and the Hindu are saying the same thing about Brahman, for instance, right? And it started making sense. So my life then evolved to dreaming about books I needed to read, teachers I would meet along my path, during conscious connected breathwork sessions. And some of these books were in hieroglyphics, so I didn't understand how I would understand them. Some of these books were Hindu, some of these books were Sufi, Islam, etc. And I went and collected them all. I remember the one girl at Exclusive Books in Hyde Park said, "Why are you reading competing religions?" Because it says the source is the same, right? So that's why I needed to understand. And it kept on reinforcing myself. So where I find myself now, fast forward, is that I've started a space that I call Ekuphileni. My name is Philani. Philani means live or live well. Ekuphileni means house of life. And my grandfather, when you get married in the Zulu tradition, your father will name the house that you are building. So in my case, the equivalent of my father is him. He named the house I will build for him, Ekuphileni, only to learn in dreams that in ancient Egypt, and my lineage has deep connection with ancient Egypt, I've learned since, that they would call the house of life the Per Ankh. It was a university temple complex where people and wisdom keepers and healers would meet to advance the understanding of cosmology and understanding. And breathwork was a key tool in that. So in short, where I find myself now, Ekuphileni, I've paused it a bit because work, professional work. But what happens now, Ella, I go into meetings with very senior C-level executives of listed companies, and we talk about spirit, about breath, and we spend the last 5 minutes talking about work. So the two worlds seems to have converged automatically, despite the fact that I no longer hold the Ekuphileni sessions that I used to hold on Thursdays, which is coincidentally is Thursday today. So where I find myself is I'm in a space where the liberation through breath work and having experienced in an altered state of consciousness multiple times, the connectedness that I've got to everything and everyone has just allowed me to show up in ways that are very difficult to describe in my professional work. And for the first time, I think I'm building a business that speaks to that. My business partners that I've attracted speak the same language. One of them is Czech, so grew up atheist, but another is Muslim, another is Christian. But when we speak to each other, it's as if we grew up together. So breathwork for me, therefore, has been my I suppose my technology to connect. Izangoma use the drum or rhythm or sound. It's all vibration, because even in breath, there is a sound vibration that's happening. But anyway, I'll pause there for now. So I hold conversations either in groups through Ekuphileni, but mostly these days it's one-on-one. And the work just flows in its own way. But I'm attempting to write some of what I'm learning. I'm studying hieroglyphics, translating them into isiZulu. I'm a really bad student though, so it's taking longer than I thought it would.
There's so much richness in what you've just shared, Philani. It's really moving for me that your path has been so aligned with breath, and it feels like it has been so, even from the time that you were spending time with your grandfather, and that it was a part of his life and his calling too. I remember a conversation that we had once after a conscious connected breathing session, and I remember that so profoundly, because what you shared was the sense that your ancestors were not outside of you, but that they were part of you. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it feels like it's
Yeah,
speaking to this unity versus
yeah,
separation consciousness.
precisely. I'm glad you said that. And I think that's what I struggled with as a kid, right? Because the construct was, or at least what I was being taught at the time, was that firstly, the construct of God or the divine is something that you pray to, something that you approach with great reverence. It sits outside of you. It's bigger than you. It's perfect. And then you, being born in sin, you are this fallible human being that must just not sin, and by grace you will go to heaven, right? Whether I was taught rightly or wrongly, that's what generally some of us experience church as young people. And I struggled with that because my sense, even at the time, was that surely I'm bigger than that, right? Not in an egotistical way, but I just felt this. So I felt divine connection in any divine space I found myself in. Whether I was going into my grandfather's church or whether I was going to my father's church when I tried to build a relationship with him, he was Catholic. Whether I was going to the Shemba church that my cousins go to, I always found connection with the divine. So this separatedness, even within the Christian cosmology that exists between different interpretations, I just couldn't relate to it. Then later on, only through that breathwork experience, that first one, and I cried because it was firstly, there was this feeling of just pure love that I felt when I was in that space. But the experience that we've had or been taught about ancestors is that must fear them, you must appease them because they're angry, blah, 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 which is the same with the church understanding. You know, if you sin, he'll be angry with you. But I didn't experience that at all. I experienced pure love and experienced feeling like I'm connected to everything. It's very difficult to describe. So when I said to you that day, my ancestors are part of me, and I think this is also the limitation of the contemporary understanding of IsiNTU or African spirituality, if I use that term, because we limit it to ancestors, our blood ancestors. But when you study the cosmologies, and this is what I'm hoping to write, is that Ntu itself, that primordial source consciousness, the original consciousness, the Nguni cosmology says, when he took the first breath and became conscious of itself, all souls were created at that particular point. Yeah? And then in breathing in and out, there's a spiral that then happens that allowed creation, enabled creation to happen so Ntu may experience itself in different forms, in a multitude of forms. And that's what we are here. So one of my teachers asked me when I started training with him, he asked me, who are you and what are you? And I said, I'm an investor, I'm a father. You know, he says, no. And when we explained to me is that all we are is pure consciousness. This is who we are. And what we are is energy, which is spirit. So that for that pure consciousness to animate here in individuated form, it transforms the soul, the universal soul transforms itself into individuated spirit, soul and spirit. And that's how we get to experience the world. So in other words, Ntu is the original cosmic ancestor. And then Du, out of itself, created other principles that govern the working of the universe. And certain traditions have called those gods and goddesses. We call them Amatongo, because another name for Du is Utongo, which means the great peaceful one. To be Ebtongwen is to be asleep. In other words, to be at peace or to be in a state of nirvana, as it were. So he created Amatongo out of itself. So these are the principles that govern how the universe functions. And in our individual form, as individuated versions of the universe or of Ntu, those principles exist in us as our cosmic ancestors. They sit in different parts of our bodies at a physical level and at a neurobiological level through in our brain, in our vagus nerve, in different energy centers of the body that the Eastern cosmologies have taught us to be chakras. And I did not know that there are equivalents of these in the Nguni understanding. When you go through the process of initiation, it is to unlock those different energy centers so your spirit may rise from the base of your spine or your base of your vagus nerve, right through the rising of Kundalini, which we call Umbilini. So when I said to you, they live inside me, that for me was the biggest breakthrough, because I always would speak to, and I would never understand, because when Umkulu, my grandfather, was at church, he would be praying in a begging way to an external God. But when he's at home, Msamo, the family altar, the ancestral altar, he would be commanding what must happen. So the relationship is very different because he understands that the people he's speaking to, or the different fractals or aspects of consciousness that are his ancestors that sit in him, he can command them because he's one with them. He is them. He's actually talking to his higher self. Now, for me, that was so liberating because, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a god, but all the qualities of the original source all exist in me. And what breath has allowed me to do is access parts of that. And I know I haven't even scratched the surface. And that's what I find so powerful. And other traditions will then use Iboga, will use ayahuasca. We've got something called the Ngota here locally, which is the Bushman's poison bulb that can help, release DMT. I'm fortunate that in my case, I consider myself fortunate that breathwork achieves that. In fact, a friend of mine, the same friend who introduced me to breathwork, is too scared to give me mushrooms because he says, "No, I've seen how you are just with breath." But so yeah, maybe let me stop there. I'm saying maybe a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to so much of what you're saying there, Philani. I'm interested in the word "tu"
Yes,
and it being part of the word Ubuntu. We use the word
yes.
Ubuntu a lot, and I
Mm,
think that many people see this concept of Ubuntu, and this is what I learned from Sister Tendo as well,
yes,
is that it is understood in quite a one-dimensional way, but in
yes,
fact, it speaks to the interrelatedness of all that is, and it
yes.
seems like that's what you're saying and what you actually experienced. And can you talk more to that?
Ooh, um, okay, so precisely, right? Because it's almost as if there's a commercial corporate accepted definition of Ubuntu. I am because we are doing
Yeah,
this for Ubuntu. But in its true sense, if when Ntu was creating out of itself and breathing in and out in different spirals of creation over the last 14 billion or so years, there were certain, for lack of a better term, laws that were embedded in the workings of the universe. Those laws, we summarize them as Ubuntu. It's cosmic divine law. What that means is that for everything that happens, there's a reaction, whether you see it now or you see it in 100 years, there is a reaction because everything is one, everything is connected. So in the Egyptian construct, they call that Ma'at, cosmic divine law. I'm studying the concept of Dharma from a Hindu perspective now. It's always, for me, it sounds extremely similar. So Ubuntu, so maybe let me take it a slight step further so it makes sense. Our understanding is that Umuntu was translated to a human being. The word Umuntu. That's not what it means in the African cosmological understanding. The understanding is that there are different levels of our spirit, starting with our physical self when we come here. Our name is an aspect of our spirit, our aura, etc. And as you graduate up the tree of life, which you call Usumagate, the eternal one, you can then being umuntu is a state in which you're on a journey to attain here on earth. Umuntu, in short, is a divine being on earth, a true representation of being in balance and homeostasis and being one with all. That means fellow human beings, the water bodies, the plant life, the animal life, the cosmos itself, and hence our people, even the calendars that we used to follow, are very much aligned to the breathing cycles or the cycles of the cosmos or nature. There's certain things we wouldn't do when the moon was waning. There's certain things we wouldn't do in winter. There's things we'd only do in summer, because the understanding is that when the cosmos is in that state, your body, as an embodied cosmos in itself, is also experiencing certain things. And women are a perfect representation of that every month. So there's certain things you then don't do. So ukuba nobuntu, for you to become umuntu, you then need to study and understand through lived experience the cycles of the cosmos. And to be umuntu, to be divine, you have to be in balance with those cycles. So umuntu that does not embody that, umuntu that treats plant life, animal life, human life in a way that is not in balance, is not considered umuntu, isilwane, literally. Because the understanding is that we do have an animal self in us, but we've got a higher self, umuntu. In other words, a Christ consciousness that lives in all of us. And we're in a journey here to cultivate it. Whether you do it in one incarnation or multiple, that's a different story. So umuntu is that, right? So to become umuntu, therefore, the studying of how to be in homeostasis with everything and the living how to be in homeostasis, that is ubuntu. Yeah. So you can not therefore have ubuntu when you are living in separation consciousness. When you are saying, I'm chosen he's not, I'm special, he's not. The understanding is that the different pieces of us are offering perspectives that make my experience complete. I've chosen to incarnate at this time and meet the diverse, because the one thing that is abundant about Umdali Ondu is diversity of planets, of star systems, of galaxies, of plant life, of different shades. Look at us in this picture. So as soon as you start to see separation, you are not living according to Ubuntu. When you see separation as an opportunity to learn and grow, that's different from a different perspective, because you are learning from a different version of yourself. But if the different version of yourself you fear, and therefore you want to suppress, or you want to convert to your understanding, you are no longer practicing Ubuntu.
Mm. Wow. You know, when you speak of or dimensions of Ubuntu, I think of my own journey of understanding this human form and how it has deepened through the lens of breath. And to your point, how our physical bodies are really a microcosm of the whole universe. And in fact, when we truly study all our systems, our respiratory system, our cardiovascular system, our, our neurobiological system, we can appreciate the whole physical form as a support to facilitate breath. That our entire body is designed to facilitate breath. And for me, it was beginning to understand this physical form as embodied Ubuntu, so far removed from the way I had been taught about the physical body at medical school. So my own process of healing and facilitating the healing process for others was to come back to this home of this interconnected body and to deepen that. And the more I began to deepen that within my physical body, the more I began to see less of the separation between all of life as you describe.
Yo, Ella, you have no idea how mind-blowing that is for me to see every day. Because once you start to see it, you can't unsee it, right? And that's the beauty. You know, so I mean, just maybe to put a perspective on that is to say the reason the words uMoya and umphefumulo I find so fascinating, because uMoya could mean air, the air we breathe. It also means spirit, right? Spirits, whether of one we consider to be living or ones we consider to have been departed. And then the eternal aspect of that we call umphefumulo in Zulu, at least as we know it today, and that is the soul. But the act of breathing in Zulu is called ukuphefumula. So the word for soul is umphefumulo. Umoya is the actual, air or life force that we breathe. But by breathing, so you essentially enabling your soul through the act of breathing, you're enabling your soul to live, to experience itself in that embodied aspect of itself. And remember, the soul is universal. It was created 14 billion years ago when Tu created out of itself, at least from our cosmological understanding. It has chosen to embody itself in you right now to experience to have a certain experience and understanding. And this is why it's important that the liberation of breathing properly allows the soul to experience different parts of your body that if you're breathing from here, as you've taught me, the rest of the body is not getting that experience, or the soul is not getting the experience of those different parts of your body. And for me, breath or breathing or phefumulo and consciousness are almost one and the same thing, right? Because it's through us understanding how connected the individual fractals of consciousness are for my own consciousness to embody do properly, that universal consciousness or connectedness, as it were. But yeah.
Mm. I had a podcast interview with somebody a couple of years ago, and they said, "Oh, wow, Breathwork-Africa, it's so great that you're bringing breath to Africa." And I was,
Yeah, that's interesting.
wow, wow. I was, yeah. And so I think that was one of the reasons we really started to name the seven threads of humanity, because we believe that the energy that is held in this continent and the deep wisdom and that is so inherent in the land, in the people, is really what the rest of humanity is needing to tap into.
Mm, mm,
What is this energy that is held in Africa in terms of, if we talk about energy centers, what does
mm.
Africa hold in terms of energy centers um,
Oof.
of the planet? I'm asking big questions here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting, right? And that modern science, at some point, it feels like it's sort of catching up with some of the ancient wisdom keepers wrote down. Because, so for instance, in Nguni cosmology, the understanding is that life started here in the central southern Africa, right? The story goes, according to Credo Mutwa, was Isanusi, or a sage, who wrote a lot in code, but actually put down our cosmology because he wasn't really allowed. So he used izinganekwane, or myths, to tell stories of our cosmology. And one of them is that the 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 first human was a woman in what today we call the Kalahari, the Mahadi area, which was much bigger than what it is now. And it was a field of water, right? Or the 0 point field in quantum physics, now they call it. She came out and was the first creation, and she could feel this potential to create life within herself that existed in her. In other words, to put it practically, she was ovulating. So she willed the creation of a man who would give a seed for her to create life. So from Nguni understanding, the woman was here first. She willed the creation of this ugly thing that she first didn't like because didn't come out looking so good, but she needed the seed, and they consummated. And in their consummating, the first humans were created. And modern science calls that woman mitochondrial Eve, who has been proven to come from the same area. That's number one. Number two, the ancient Kemites, or the ancient Egyptians, wrote about a line, what they call the line of Zep-Tepi. Zep-Tepi means first time. The line of Zep-Tepi is the line of longitude that we know as 30, I think it's 31 degrees east. That line goes from Durban, literally, past the stone circles of Mpumalanga, past where the white lions are, which is the only place in the world where you find them, passing Great Zimbabwe, all the way to the Great Pyramids of Giza, and also to the source. It passes the source of the Nile. So the cosmological understanding, therefore, is that the Nile starts underneath in Durban before the Nile is the source of the Nile in Central Africa. There's an equal distance between Durban and the source of the Nile to the Great Pyramids of Giza. It's mathematically perfect. So they call that the line of first time. Now, modern science is telling us that the first single life organism found on Earth is in the Mpumalanga area where this line passes. And the ancient Kemites wrote that they came up through this line, which is the line of first time, which means the line of where creation started. Now, they then wrote that the land from the equator down, they call that Taneta. Neta is the gods. They call it the land of the gods. In other words, the land where creation was formed, right? So there's something, and in the book I've been attempting to write, I've been reflecting a lot on why do people feel this way when they come to the country? Because when I look at South Africa, I've been fortunate to travel around the world for work and other things. The only other country, I can't think of any other country that hasn't colonized anyone that has the whole world in it. The only other countries in the world that have the populations of all the continents in it is the UK and America. America is a colony. I'm not gonna expand on that in a way. And the UK is because the people they colonized moved there at some point. But South Africa has everyone. All of Africa is here. The rest of the world is here. And they come here and they feel at home. And mostly they don't want to leave. And I think it's because everyone's returning to the Great Mother. And in returning to the Great Mother, maybe another point I want to make, in my experience of breath, as a very male, someone who comes from a very patriarchal dominated culture, at least in the last 300 years because of the wars, the Zulu culture, and having learned that before that it was actually matriarchal, we turned because we were focused on creating warriors for the different wars that were happening. Through breath, I've had to rediscover that I actually have a feminine side. So for some of that to happen, for people to experience fully, I believe, their divine feminine, this is the space you go home to ugogo, which is very interesting because for us, ugogo, the grandmother, the holiest place in a homestead, indlu kagogo, is her hut. That's where we go pray. Because our understanding is that the gateway to this, that the soul used to come to this plane, is a woman's womb. So the gateway to connect back is her heart, which represents her womb as well. But breath, in the way I've experienced it, is soft and feminine, like her. So my thesis, Ella, is that people are just trying to connect back to source. And the energy that is here is source energy. Not just here, but and I say Central Africa down, and you see it, the richness of the land itself, the mineral deposits, which unfortunately attract the wrong type of energies. But and the joy and the love. There's a story I always laugh. One of my teachers speaks about one of the architects of apartheid. Honestly, thought the Black people in South Africa were mentally unwell because he says no matter what I put them through, they still smiling, they still joyous. But that is the nature of the original source field, that ultimate bliss, that ultimate peace, that nirvana state. That is our original state that us here, we just know how to access freely because of where we are.
Thank you, Philani, for sharing that. Yeah, there's a deep resonance with what you are sharing. I have so many more questions, but I'm going to ask you one last question before we hand over to the circle. If there was anyone who'd like to ask a question, they're welcome to. Before we hand over, though, and I know you're going to guide us into a little breathwork session as we end. So my last question to you, Philani, is given what we are seeing in the world right now, given what is playing out in every part of the world, and the devastation, the disintegration, the collapse of so many systems, what gives you hope in the midst of where we currently find ourselves right now?
To be honest, in so many levels, it's the place that I was born in, and I'll explain what I mean. Because, and again, my own thesis is that for consciousness to fully experience itself on this planet, consciousness needed to inhabit the entire planet. So if mitochondrial Eve gave birth to us here, we started traveling and we inhabited the whole world. And in some of that happening, or needing to happen, there was fragmentation or separation, etc., which was ultimately necessary for some to do the things they needed to do to colonize and move and travel, etc., etc. But what I find now and what gives me hope is this. When I observe my kids, when I observe their friends, and when I travel around the world and I interact, and because I work in the startup community quite a lot, I work a lot with young people. There seems to me to be a great awakening to the unity with all that's happening with the next generations. But not only with the next generations, right? Even in chaos, I mean, in COVID, I can count maybe 15 people who had a spiritual awakening during that place of chaos, because ultimately that DNA that sits with us, that memory, in other words, that consciousness, that unity consciousness exists within us. The chaos that we see today, I also see as the last grasp of a dying consciousness. And I will say this, no offense meant to any white males in the room, if there are. It's a white male, power, masculine dominated consciousness, which has ruled the world for the last 2000 or so years. The divine feminine has been forgotten, including the divine Mother Earth, in that pursuit. And I'm seeing young people of all races saying, no, there has to be a difference. Even when I was student consulting for a big firm, the way we pitched to young people when we hired them was very different to how I was hired by Accenture when I started. They pitched me a great salary. Now we were pitching sustainability, ESG, etc. It's a very different world. So what gives me hope is that there is a shift in consciousness that's happening, albeit slowly by our impatient standards, given our short time here on this earth. And for some reason, in the awakening that's happening, even my friends who are Izangoma, some of which are here, who have joined us, their awakening is happening very differently. They're being asked to read about Hinduism or this and that in their own spiritual awakening, because that unity consciousness in them is screaming for wholeness, for full understanding rather than limited perspectives. So that gives me great hope. I don't think I'm not naive to say that one. I mean, also I was at a festival this past weekend. I was at Tomorrowland for a friend. I'm not a big party person, but I went to Tomorrowland in Brussels, and I have not seen. There were over 200 nationalities of 200,000 people in one weekend. Everyone was genuinely happy to be with each other, because I think that space attracts the types of individuals who see themselves as being part, to some extent, whether they see it consciously or not, as being part of the one consciousness. The music for me was weird because I'm not an EDM person, but I enjoyed the experience of being with the whole world in one space. So that gives me hope, right? And there will be these, whether you're talking the current leaders who are refusing for women to take up leadership, these white males and their dominance and armies, etc., etc. That is going to die. But it's not going to die easily. They're going to hold on. They're going to create more chaos. But what sits inside us, all of us, is way more powerful than their threats and their fear mongering.
Indeed. And it begins with every conscious breath that we celebrate as the embodiment of uMoya.
Yes, 100%.
Philani, I'm going to hand over to the circle. So if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to put it into the chat box, or you're welcome to raise your hand, digital or otherwise, and we can unmute you if you'd like to ask Philani a question. You're more than welcome. I think we have time for a couple of questions. Venice, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes, it's Vanisi.
Venice.
Yeah. Firstly, I'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Ella, for bringing this subject, and also for bringing Philani. And every single word that you said, Philani, really resonates a lot with me. And I am so So I'm so incredibly grateful. And also because I saw your email in the very, very last minute, and then I just joined like out of like this impulse, you know, and then I was so glad that I joined you guys. My question to you, Philani, is about your disciplines. Do you have any disciplines and rituals that you do? You mentioned a couple of books that you read and you're still studying and reading. And also mentioned something about the meditation. Do you have any rituals in that sense? Like, if you can share a little bit with us
Yeah.
about
So
which kind of meditation do you do?
yeah. So Vanessa, firstly, which part of the world are you from?
I am Brazilian.
Ah,
I
nice,
lived in
nice.
South Africa, in Cape Town, for 17 years, and right now I'm living in a very little tiny place in Austria.
Oh, nice. Okay, okay. So in terms of discipline, right? So do I have a particular? So I'm still in training, in spiritual training, right? So at the moment, I finished, for lack of, my wife calls it a bachelor's degree with my spiritual teacher, and she calls what I'm doing now a PhD. So I'm on a 3-year initiation process. What that means is that at the moment, my meditations are prescribed. But in general, when I don't have the time to do those meditations, I simply, every morning, so I wake up at 4 a.m. I'm not saying wake up at 4 a.m. I just do. I'm that person. And I spend the first hour on me before going to gym. What that means is I sit around my altar, sit in stillness, in quietness, and I just breathe. Depending on how I feel, it could be the breathwork that I'll do today, which is a vagus toning breathwork that I'll share with some of you today. And what that does with me, it calms me down. Before I utter any word to the divine in terms of prayer, I want to make sure that I'm centered, right? And then every night, then I do the prescribed meditations that Shengo, my teacher, has prescribed for me based on my path, right? So from a discipline perspective, I'd say that time with self alone, whether you do it in the morning or whether you do it in the evening, it depends on the individual circumstance. And through the Breathwork Africa training as well, there were certain breathwork exercising that we were required to do. Ella knows how bad a student I am, so I wasn't not always consistent. But yeah, so for me, the most important thing, set time with self. Whether that time is in breath work, whether that time is in movement, whether that time is in traditional meditation, if I want to call it that. The practice, the type of meditation itself, for me, is secondary. It is useful, but that time with self and the consistency around that is probably what makes the most difference for me.
Thank you so much, Philani.
Thank you.
Okay, Yogini, would you like to unmute? I think you have a question.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was also a last-minute invitation. I'm very, very grateful to be here, and I definitely can resonate to what he's saying. It's really mind-blowing to understand that you're not the only one that's feeling this way. And I just want to have a question. Because I am doing a lot of studying. I also study shamanic healing. So it's really broadened my aspect on spirituality. And in listening to you has really been very enlightening. I just want to find out, how do you know when your intuition is speaking to you?
Whew, that's a
Because I'm studying
that's a
biomastering as well, and
yeah.
scientifically the brain how it's connected as well to the vagus nerve, opening the frontal
Mm,
cortex and
mm.
stuff like that. But how do you know that your intuition is speaking to you and not just the spirit?
I'd argue intuition is part of your spirit, though. Okay, I think it's personal. I can't prescribe that there's one way. In my case, right, because I'm trained in finance and accounting. Then I worked in management consulting that further developed. So, for instance, in high school, I used to have access to my right brain. I used to write plays, write songs. As soon as I studied accounting and I went into management consulting, that ability completely disappeared. So my left brain was given attention. So when I started seeing things or hearing voices telling me to do things, I'd be like, nah, So in my case, what started happening is that I would find there would be other things that would reinforce the message or the intuition or the dream that I'd had. As an example, I dreamt that I needed to go spend time in the mountain alone for 5 days. As soon as I woke up, it was a breathwork session. As soon as I woke up, my younger son said, Daddy, when are you going camping alone in the mountain? So what tends to happen what I find is that spirit is kind enough to allow us the process of trusting our intuition or spirit again. Chances are it's not just your intuition, Yogani. I might be wrong. There are other things that are reinforcing that feeling. You just that's why the time itself is important, because you can then listen and train yourself to hear, but also you will be much more aware of what's going on around you, and the reinforcing messages that will support that intuition will appear. Then you know to trust it, and the muscle, if I want to call it that, will develop. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question, Yogini. So we have time for one more question, because I know Philani also wants to guide us into a little breathwork experience. So Tracy, would you like to
Thanks,
unmute?
Ila. Philani, it has been absolutely incredible listening to you. You speak my language, and yeah, I've been hanging on every word. I want to ask you if you have an opinion on the dichotomy of AI in the world at the moment, and the consciousness experiencing itself, and perhaps the whole AI trend is here to show us the opposite of that, and through that we become more connected. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do have a developing opinion, largely influenced by a guy called Federico Fagin. He's an Italian physicist who actually is one of the inventors of the microprocessor. And his argument is that AI will never be conscious in the way that humans are, because the understanding up till now in science is that matter precedes consciousness, right? So its consciousness is something you can make and build and code, right? But essentially what I've been saying is consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness came first, and all we are is that consciousness experiencing itself. So whatever we create will not have the ability to tap into that, because there's no such thing as Tracy's consciousness and Philani's. It's one consciousness. So AI will not be able to access to that. My hope, though, because I do invest in technology, is that from an economic standpoint, AI and robotics, etc., will allow us to work less. Because one of the reason that the ancient wrote the incredible things they wrote, they built the pyramids, they did all of the stuff, is that they weren't working every day. Winter, it was time to self-introspect, meditate, grow as a conscious being. In summer, in spring, you plant, you harvest, you relax. You didn't work the whole day. I'm hoping it's going to take us back to that. And the reason I'm hoping is that because this unity consciousness is coming back again, we'll now be able to share our experiences using technology much easier. We've got a lady in Austria right here with us who wouldn't have not been able to do that before, although there are arguments that people used to communicate telepathically back in the day. That's how advanced they were. So we have devolved because of the Industrial Revolution, because we've been treated like machines. So I'm hoping that when we put machines into the economy to do the primary work, this conscious being can start to experience itself again in its own fullness. And that's a hope, because, you know, sometimes depending on who's in power, technology can always be used for the negative.
Thank you so much, Philani. And thank you, Tracy, for that question. Philani, over to you. Would you like to guide us into a short breathwork session?
Yeah, so I mentioned the fact that when Du started creating, he created principles that govern the universe, and that those principles sit in us. In the IsiNTU understanding is that there are different centers in the body or in our nervous system where those gods and goddesses, intelligent principles sit. And we understood the vagus nerve in particular to be at the center of governing that. So essentially, the vagus nerve to us is a spiritual superhighway. There's various rituals, etc., that allow us to tone the vagus nerve. So this breathwork is a very simple one, to essentially massage, for lack of a better term, massage your vagus nerve to allow the superhighway to open up. Another way to massage it is to fast, by the way. But anyway, fasting is another conversation for another day. So it's literally going to be breathing in up to 4 and breathing out longer, up to 6 to 8. I'll start with 6. And as you breathe in, I'd like you to squeeze your belly to as close as possible. That's when you massage the vagus nerve. And the idea, the longer breath allows you to calm your nervous system down. That's the science behind it. So if I may please invite you to sit as comfortably as you can. And as you take a deep breath in and out, another deep breath in and out, deep breath in for the 3rd time and out. And now we start breathing in up to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in, out. Remember to squeeze your stomach at the bottom, in, out, in, and out. And in again, and out. Breathe in, and out. As you breathe in, extend the belly. Breathe in and out. In and out. Breathe in and out. I'd like to invite you to take a deep breath in and out. And when you're ready, you can bring yourself back into the room. I'll pause here for now, also because of time. So back to the question earlier, I spend typically about 20 minutes in the morning when I am disciplined, just doing that. And in days where I'm consistently What I haven't said to you is that people who grew up with me in the township will tell you how short a temper I have, but people who know me for the last 2 years will tell you I'm the most calm human being that I ever met. And I credit this particular practice to that.
Wow. Thank you, Philani, for sharing that practice with us today and just for this rich, insightful, beautiful conversation. It has sparked so much for me, and I'm sure for many people, so much hope, curiosity, wonder, and really joy and a remembering. I think that this circle today, this conversation today, was a great collective remembering. And when we come together in circles like this, in the name of breath and sharing breath, something really powerful happens and it has a ripple effect. And I really believe that and I trust that. So once again, Philani, thank you so much for your presence, your wisdom, and your breath. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this rich conversation. This has been Threads of Healing, Voices of Breathwork-Africa. May what you've heard and felt here ripple into your own life in meaningful ways. So please share this conversation with anyone who would benefit. You will find this loaded up on YouTube, and join us for future episodes as we continue to explore the diverse ways breath heals, connects, and awakens us. So until next time, breathe gently. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.